maps. The second map that Greg and I have been referring to, and the one that says Sorrell's late morning attack, May 6, 1864. We were just over in the vicinity of McAllister's brigade. We're now in the vicinity of Ward's brigade. So walking from the last stop to this one, we kind of come around the left flank of the Union Army, and we moved up there to Hobart Ward's brigade. An anonymous soldier in the 20th Indiana of Ward's brigade wrote, he said, "Suddenly, something in that direction attracted my attention, and I looked to the left. I was horrified at the sight that met my gaze. The enemy had flanked us, as I supposed, and there we saw, bearing down upon us, a perfect sea of panic-stricken soldiers from our own broken lines of battle. What could we do? The fire was murderous along the front. We could not avoid them by escape to the rear. There was no time for that. Most of our command were unaware of the danger. We could do nothing but allow ourselves to be caught up and absorbed in the onrushing torrent of terrified humanity." Pretty good description of a flank attack, a surprise move that takes an organization, a military group, by surprise from a direction that they're not facing. And that's what a flank attack is. So I thought it'd be a little important to talk about exactly why this was sought out and what it means. Gregg said at the last stop, another successful Confederate flank attack in the making. The flank attack is what every commander seeks on the Civil War battlefield, or perhaps any military engagement. Taking the enemy and hitting him from the position from which he is not looking. The Union Army is facing west, and the attack is coming from the south. Your brigades, your divisions, your corps are arrayed to fight against an enemy coming from one direction, and that enemy comes from another, coming from the south. It really has become, in many instances here in Virginia, sort of the Confederate Army's go-to for maneuvers on the battlefield. It really can do tremendous damage, and you can often do it with fewer troops than those you're attacking. Stonewall Jackson turned the Union Army's flank during the 7 days outside Richmond in 1862. Jackson again had maneuvered his army around the flank of the Union Army during the Second Manassas campaign. James Longstreet, a flank attack at Second Manassas as well. Stonewall Jackson, of course, the most famous one, just a few miles down the road here on May 2nd, 1863. It can really neutralize a large segment of the enemy's forces in a very, very quick amount of time. To do so, however, you are taking a risk, because usually you're dividing your army. In order to get around the flank and make that flank attack, you often, in the case here, you have to detach units from the safety of their parent organizations and other support. So in this case, those 3.5 brigades moving along the railroad are completely out of touch with the rest of Longstreet's command, which is down the flank road. So there is a risk involved. However, it could change the course of the battle and certainly could lead to victory. What happens here is the quintessential flank attack. The Union resistance, as that 20th Indiana soldier said, was pointless. It was futile. The attack came through the woods, masked, surprised, and so fast that as one unit such as McAllister's brigade broke, and as it fell back, being pushed by Wofford's Georgians, Mahone's Virginians, it fell upon the next organization, the next brigade to the north, and likewise, just telescoping back and tearing up and chewing up the flank of the army. In this attack, there were 3.5 brigades, but really those that have the biggest impact are Mahone and Wofford. Davis is too far off to the east, essentially coming in too small. Stone commanding Davis too far off to the west, and he is coming in too far in front, and it doesn't have a whole lot of impact. Anderson is behind the line. It is behind the Federal lines. So it's Wofford and Mahone that are chewing up and pushing up. The Union brigades are collapsing upon one another. As McAllister fell, Hayes, Ward, and as they're pushing back, they are running into their own units and pushing them. And suddenly the Union left flank is completely up in the air and is being driven by these brigades. If you take those two brigades that made the attack, Wofford and Mahone, combined you had 11 Confederate infantry regiments that in just a short amount of time is going to stun and almost rout a complete, the equivalent of a complete Army Corps. Just a tremendous, this is the quintessential flank attack that occurs here on May 6, 1864. And just imagine, as we have walked through the woods here, we've got just a few hundred yards before we reach the plank road and reach the destination. But just imagine what we've come through. We've walked through, we've meandered our way through, we've picked ourselves over the streams and the marshes. But 3.5 brigades, thousands of men standing shoulder to shoulder and covering that distance until they hit McAllister up on that knoll, until they force Ward from this position here, trying to maintain that battle formation and coming forth. There was just a wall of men hitting the Federal line and just rolling it up. The Federal left flank, the Union left flank, is just fleeing off to the north. And this is going to impact more units. Those on the other side of the plank road to the north are also going to be affected by this here, by what goes on in these woods, and as the fugitives rush across the plank road. It's going to create chaos. Chaos up on the plank road, chaos in which very unfortunate things will occur for both the Union and Confederate armies. So with that, we'll take a walk, follow our pathway and our flagging through the woods. Our next stop will be within sight of the plank road, and then we'll get up onto the plank road itself.
I've been asked quite a few times so far over this past day and a half as maybe something you might be wondering about. We talk about the wilderness vegetation and how dramatically different it is from the more mature forest we have. And folks have asked, is there any place that you can think of where you might get an idea of what the wilderness is like? The best example that I can think of that is easy to find, if you go to the Widow Tap Field, not where the park tour stop is along Hilliel Drive, but the far side of it, there is a little parking lot on the west side of the field. And when we established that, we decided that we wanted to let some vegetation grow up there to block the views of the cars from people in the field. So that's an area where you can see some little trees close together with all kinds of briars inside that I think would be a good example of what the wilderness would have looked like.
Or they can visit me in Brightwood. To block my property.
All right, somebody has some property. I guess he did some clear cutting that he says you can get your own pack of wilderness. You're looking to sell it, correct? Is that what you're saying?
Well, we got a little lawn on the inside.
Okay. All right. Now, the purpose of my stop here, now that we are within sight of the Orange Plank Road, is to tell you just a little bit about what was going on the other side during this flank attack. And so while we're not going to go over there and we don't have much park property on the other side of the road, I'll touch upon the role of two generals, James Wadsworth and David Bell Birney, and I'll share with you one of my favorite quotes from this battle about a soldier on the other side of the road, him dealing with this flank attack and dealing with the wilderness. And then lastly, what are the Union soldiers doing once they vacate this area? So first of all, with the generals, Wadsworth and Birney, as their commands got all intermingled, basically decided to take control of one or the other side of the Orange Plank Road. For James Wadsworth, when this flank attack began, he came up with 3 different ideas of what he thought might help. 2 of them were, I thought, very, very good, even though they didn't work. One was he thought maybe he could send some responsible officer down here to try to rally some of these forces that had broken. Generally a good idea. And he turned to General Webb, of Alexander Webb of the Angle at Gettysburg fame. Webb went over here, tried to rally some folks, but he said he saw the impossibility of affecting anything and returned to his own brigade after trying and giving up. The second thing that Wadsworth thought might be a good idea is to try to take some of the regiments here and turn them to face south, to try to head off this flank attack. 2 regiments, of course, isn't much. He had no idea what was really coming up in this direction. But he took the 56th Pennsylvania and the 76th New York of James Rice's brigade, turned them on the plank road in front of you. I don't know if it's exactly this spot, but somewhere right up there. Turned them in this direction. And remember how Eric was noting that not only is this a flank attack, but that the other Confederates out to the west of us are putting pressure on the front. And as you might imagine, on the open road corridor of the Orange Plank Road, what also might be utilized to put some pressure on the front of the Federals when you think the fighting is reaching this spot? But artillery fire. So as soon as these 2 regiments got turned on the road shoulder, the next thing they noticed, Confederate artillery fire raking them from right to left coming down that road. So this idea didn't work. The last idea that Wadsworth came up was to take one of his regiments and to attack down the plank road to the west. The unit he selected was the 20th Massachusetts, and when their commander heard, he says, "Great God, that man is out of his mind." Wadsworth, seeing that the 20th Massachusetts demurred taking a frontal attack against the Confederates, decided he would lead them himself. And as he went down the road, he eventually got to a point where his horse galloped in the direction of the Confederate army, bolting out of control. He turned the horse around, and at that moment, a volley caught him, and Wadsworth was mortally wounded. There is a monument along the Orange Plank Road on the north side to James Wadsworth. His wounding site is probably further east. There are some interesting things that went on in the selection of that site. Small p politics played a role in it, but James Wadsworth is down. The other general that is in this area is David Bell Birney. He is kind of ineffective because some of that artillery fire at the right spot bounded down the road and startled his horse. And he said the horse became wholly unmanageable, and the horse apparently just went kind of back and forth, almost like a pinball machine, if you will, going from the woods on one side to the other, trying to seek some way to escape, and so he was unable to accomplish much. For my favorite quote of a Union soldier here in this battle, for this flank attack in particular, his name is Thomas Galway. He's in Carroll's brigade. He's with the 8th Ohio. He's on the other side of the road. And he said, "We advanced but a few yards when word went through our lines that we were flanked. We could see the Confederates advancing almost at a run on our rear. An attempt was made to change front to the left." Again, they're facing this way. To change front to the left is the turn this way. Turn face the advancing enemy. But it was too late, and the stiff and crooked hazel brush that surrounded us prevented any sort of a regular formation at all. By this time, many of the recruits, and again, a lot of new recruits facing their first battle in this spring, the recruits began to give way, one by one, then in 2s and 3s, until at last they went in such numbers as to give the appearance of a general skedaddle. Our veterans hallowed to the faint-hearted to come back, showering bitter curses on them, but all to no purpose. All that remained for us to do was get back to our lines, and what he meant by that, by getting back to the earthworks along the Brock Road further on to the east of us. He said there was a good deal of every man for himself in the retreat, And then one of the amusing thing that I really liked that he talked about in advancing through the wilderness, he said a sharp prong projecting from a clump of bushes caught against the hind portions of my pantaloons, exposing me unmercifully to the enemy. I picked up a shirt which I found cast away on the ground and stuffed it into the woeful rent. Then I continued my retreat in a more dignified manner. That again is Thomas Galway. What happens now when the Union troops get to the Brock Road and the earthworks? A man named Sessions of the Berdan sharpshooters had this account about General Winfield Scott Hancock, saying he rode along the line and told the men to get down behind the works and hold them at all hazards. The men protested that they could not find their regiments. He said, "Never mind that now, but hold these works." After waiting about half an hour, regiments commenced to organize. The color sergeants would plant their colors and call the name of the regiments until finally the army was quite generally reorganized. So the Union Army at this point is trying to make some organization out of the chaos of this flank attack. Confederates want to do just the opposite. Let's keep the Union Army in chaos. Let's perpetuate the confusion, and we're anxious to add additional pressure to this attack. And Eric will pick up our story with what happens next with the Confederates trying to continue this advantage, continue this momentum that they have gained by the flank attack once it reaches the road.
Congratulate yourselves, you made it. We came all the way following Sorrell's attack, and with Mahone and Wofford coming all the way from the unfinished railroad cut up here to the Plank Road. Plank Road, Orange Plank Road, is directly in front of us. The intersection with the Brock Road is a few hundred yards off to our east, your right. So as the Confederate attack pushed the Federals up here, the Federals, as Gregg just explained, began to roll back. They're streaming back across the road. Wadsworth is on the other side of the road when he takes a bullet to the head. He would linger for a couple days before he died in a Confederate hospital just down the road. But if you turn to the final map, that's one we're going to be referring to. Longstreet's wounding May 6, 1864. And we are standing right where the star is, oriented. North is in our front here, across Orange Plank Road, so that tells you 740 yards off to our right is the Brock Road intersection, 1,100 yards off to our left, the west, is the Widow Tap Field. So as the Confederate attack is reaching this point, the Federals streaming before them, Mauchly Sorrell rode west, looking for Longstreet to report the success of the attack, to let Longstreet know that they have driven in the left flank of the Union Army. Sorrell encounters Longstreet a few hundred yards down the road. Longstreet is with the command, those brigades, those divisions that he has been pushing up the Plank Road, putting the pressure on the front of the Union forces through this area, and the First Corps officers, Longstreet, his staff, the brigade commanders, division commanders that are around him, are thrilled. I mean, this is exactly what they wanted. The Plank Road intersection, or corridor, I should say, extremely important for those of you that went on the tour last night. The neutralization of Hancock's force down here, extremely important. Consider where things were, and if this is about noon, when they're reaching this point up here, consider how things had changed in 6 hours. And at 6 o'clock in the morning, 5 to 6 o'clock in the morning, it looked as though the Army of Northern Virginia was going to lose the field. Robert E. Lee was riding onto the battlefield, into danger, urging his men forward. And in a matter of just a few hours,
It's now the Union Army that is in serious trouble. Lee has turned everything around with Longstreet in just a matter of 6 hours. Longstreet understood that the flank attack had succeeded. This is wonderful, but the battle's still not over. They've got to continue and follow up with this success. Hancock still held the intersection 700 yards off to the east, and just because they pushed his forces back and neutralized them doesn't necessarily mean they can't regroup. They've got to keep the pressure on. Whereas the year earlier, Jackson's flank attack at Chancellorsville, daylight was working against the Confederates. Jackson's attack occurred, reached its peak as the sun was going down. It's only noon. Longstreet has done this and it's only noon. There is plenty of daylight, plenty of time to keep this attack moving forward. Martin L. Smith appeared once again. While all this has been going on, he's been continuing to scout off to the south, utilizing the railroad, and he has found that the railroad can carry the Confederates off to the Broad Road, and from there, they might be able to conduct a second flank attack and get into the intersection. Longstreet is thrilled and interested with this and tells Smith to pursue it. There will be another flanking maneuver. Wofford's Georgians, who have been part of this flanking attack, are to be ordered to go with Smith, and plans are being made for that. Longstreet sent Kershaw's division. Kershaw had been fighting on the south side of the Plank Road early in the morning. He had assisted in driving the Federals away from the Widow Taft farm. On the Plank Road would be, as they come forward, as Kershaw comes forward, on the Plank Road itself would be Micah Jenkins' brigade. South Carolinians. Jenkins, who is on the back of your photo of him is on the back of the handout, Brigadier General, 28 years old. Jenkins had not been feeling well for quite some time, but he's riding with Longstreet and their entourage at the head of his brigade. Longstreet is with Kershaw, Jenkins, Wofford, Sorrell, and a handful of staff. There's a list of who was in the party that afternoon, early afternoon, on the map that we're looking at, Longstreet's wounding. As they rode east, they're passing into this area where we're standing now. Directly in front of us, right here along the Plank Road. There's the dense woods on either side, tremendous smoke, the chaos of intermingled units. There were Union soldiers, even though they've been driven, there are pockets of them that have been isolated in the woods that are still causing trouble, need to be rooted out. There are Federals still on the other side of the road. Longstreet and his entourage are riding into this. Right where we're standing is where Mahone's brigade, the Virginians, had ended up. Once they had completed the flank attack up to this point, they stopped here on this side of the road. They had hit the Plank Road, but the 12th Virginia, the far-right regiment, as they were coming up, had encountered some burning woods. Some of the woods were on fire in this area, and the 12th Virginia had veered off to the east to go around this burning area. The woods were on fire. And in doing so, they detached themselves from the brigade, and as they're coming through this area where we're standing right now, they cross on over the Plank Road. The rest of the brigade had stopped, but they cross over the Plank Road. They realized once they got into the dense woods on the other side that they were alone. And so they turned around. The regiment swings around and faces south in this direction. So you now have the 12th Virginia on the other side of the road, the rest of Mahone's regiments here, and they're facing one another. The 12th Virginia is on the other side of the road. It's a chaotic scene in the woods. You've got the burning of the woods, the smoke. Men are exhausted. They're tense. Not a good scene. Someone was heard to shout out, "Look out, boys, they're coming back." There's concern, anxiety. Men are anxious in these woods. Mahone instructed his men to be steady. The tense situation here, having just driven the Union force and now stopping. But what's in the woods in front of them? And it's into this cordon with the 12th Virginia on the other side, the rest of Mahone's brigade on this side. that Longstreet and his entourage are coming down the road, pressing forward, and they ride right between them. Scattered shots erupted from both sides of the road as Longstreet and his men just happened to be passing through. Micah Jenkins, whose brigade is in column behind on the road, Micah Jenkins raised in his stirrups and yelled out, "Steady, men, for God's sake, steady." At that point, he fell to the plank road, shot through the head. Lieutenant Alfred Dobie of Kershaw's staff also fell, as did Courier Private Marcus Baum of the 2nd South Carolina. Officers scattered into the woods, Kershaw himself jumping into the woods to avoid the fire. Others advanced towards the Virginians, yelling, "Friends, friends." Longstreet, according to Moxley Sorrell, who was riding with his corps commander, riding with his boss, Moxley Sorrell said that Longstreet was actually lifted straight up and came down hard. He's riding on his horse. Was actually lifted straight up and came down hard. Then the lead-torn coat, the orifice to the right shoulder, pointed to the passage of the heavy bullet. The shot had entered near the throat, and he almost choked with blood. So James Longstreet, the 1st Corps commander, 2nd in command of the Army of Northern Virginia. If something were to have happened to Lee earlier in the morning, Longstreet would take command of the Army. 2nd in command of the Army, 1st Corps commander, has now been shot by his own men as he's riding along the plank road. Longstreet was removed from his horse, and he choked out orders through the blood, shot through the throat. Choked out orders for Charles Field's division to continue, and he ordered Lee to receive a report and urging Lee to continue the planned attack. So Longstreet's been shot. He's pulled from the horse in the middle of the plank road here. The firing among the Virginians has stopped, and Longstreet, choking on his own blood, is trying to give orders. Keep the attack going. Keep Field moving forward, Charles Field's division. Let Lee know we must continue. Union artillery, stationed down near the Brock Road intersection, opened fire here on the plank road. Dr. John Cullen, Longstreet's medical director, arrived on scene, began attending to Longstreet. An ambulance arrived, and he was carried back to the hospitals back near Parker's store. But who had fired? It was Mahone's brigade, no doubt. Almost immediately, the different regiments within the brigade began pointing fingers at each other. Facing itself across the road, the smoke, the dense woods, the tense and confusing situation, completely understandable. Ben May, the flag bearer for the 12th Virginia that Gregg had mentioned earlier, he jumped out into the road in the midst of the fire and began waving the flag to let these men on this side know that was the 12th Virginia. Each regiment had someone to blame, while the regiments blamed each other. The brigade adjutant denied that any of the regiments were at fault. However, Longstreet, in his memoirs, as he did survive and return to the Army later that fall, Longstreet in his memoirs did say that it was Mahone's men who opened fire as he rode through. But as to which regiment, we'll probably never know, and it really doesn't matter. Longstreet, 2nd in command, Corps commander, is down, and he's down at the most important part of this attack, the most important point. They have successfully driven the Union Army, but they got to continue. They still don't control this end of the battlefield. They still don't control the important intersection, so they've got to continue. But with Longstreet's fall, the attack is now leaderless. There is no Corps commander to continue it forward. The attacks that had come up through the woods just as we followed were intermingled, trying to straighten themselves. Attacks coming down the plank road from the Taft farm, just as confused moving through the woods. And so there was confusion among Longstreet's command. Lee arrived, and he was not pleased with the arrangement. Smith's investigation of the unfinished railroad cut, the potential of sending Wofford's brigade down to the Brock Road, canceled. That movement would not be made. It never materialized. Instead, Longstreet's flank attack and his forward movement on the plank road, the attack on this end that morning into the early afternoon, ground to a halt.
lost its momentum. So just at the point where it could have done more damage and really been rammed home to success, Longstreet's fall neutralizes his own attack. The failure to follow up this attack robbed the Confederates of the ability to press home and complete the victory. Don't know whether they would have been able to continue forward, how much more damage they would have been able to have done. But Longstreet's attack at this point, as I said, had completely turned the tables on this end of the battlefield. Robert E. Lee was now the aggressor. 6 hours earlier, he had been receiving Union attacks. Now he's on the offense. And while they had to cancel any more forward momentum, while the attacks petered out here about noon, 1 o'clock, they will pick up again. Lee is not done on this end of the battlefield, but with the loss of his old war horse, James Longstreet, he's going to have to take a little time to get things straightened out to figure out what to do. And so that is going to be the subject of our next program. The next walking tour is going to look at those afternoon attacks along the Plank Road here. Where is Gregg? Has he disappeared? They are. Gregg, do you know the logistics with regard to getting back to the vehicles?
Every man for himself.
They actually issued out
All right. As Gregg was saying, the next program, which let's see, starts at 1 o'clock, and it is now quarter after 12 or 20 after 12. The next tour is actually going to start where the road trace we were just standing on intersects with Longstreet Drive at Fawn Lake. You're more than welcome to hang out down there to meet the next tour. We understand that if you want to go back to your vehicles, we believe there is, Frank had told me that there would be vans shuttling from that point back to the parking area. So you're more than welcome to head on back. But we want to thank you for coming out. I do believe this is the first time I do believe this is the first time that the Park Service has actually offered this tour, coming up from the railroad bed and following the flank attack. So you're literally and figuratively blazing new ground here. So we want to thank you for coming out.
Thank you. Thank you.